Broadcasting from Studio A here at Proven Winners Color Choice Shrubs. It's time for the Gardening Simplified Show with Stacy Hervella, me, Rick Weist, and our engineer and producer, Adriana Robinson. And welcome in. If you're listening to the radio or our podcast, feel free to tune in on YouTube to check out our faces and images of the Gardening Simplified Show. Well, today's show, we're going to take time into account. Plant selection must consider a plant's growth rate, its mature size and form, and the maintenance that it's going to require. Fast-growing plants may or may not be desirable, depending on the size of the site, or the design intent and the expected level of maintenance. Timing is everything. It's important to know the eventual mature size of a plant so they can be placed in the right location and spaced properly when they're installed. And Stacy, I think the falling of leaves is a timing and time factor thing, the shortening day length. And oh no, that's right. Daylight saving time, the end of daylight saving time is coming up.
Yes, very soon. Yeah. Get that extra hour of sleep. Gotta love that.
Wow. Starts on, back in March, right? And ends November 2. Gonna have to deal with that darkness because I love working in the landscape at night. By the way, I'm very hoarse today. I feel great, but I have no voice.
Yes, so please bear with us. Rick is okay. We're all together in the studio. He's not contagious. He's feeling great, but we're calling him Pony because he is indeed a little hoarse.
I think we'll horse around today. This should be fun. Well, the time factor regarding growth can be affected by looking down, not up. I always say that when you look at a plant, look down, not up. Take a look at the root system and where it's established. And of course, timing is important with a host of things in the landscape, whether it's crawler emergence, when you have scale, applying crabgrass preventer in the spring when the soil temperatures are just right, or BT sprays for spongy moss in the trees in early May. All of these things require timing. And of course, trees, timing is very, very important. To get it right the first time, trees are an obvious time factor in the landscape. What was it that Alexander Hamilton said about legacy? Legacy, what is a legacy? It's planting seeds in a garden you never get to see. So planting and by the way, Alexander Hamilton would have planted a sweet gum tree, by the way.
Oh, why is that?
Oh, he loved sweet gum trees. They were all around his house. If you visit his home in New York, you'll see sweet gum trees all around the house. But you think about trees like Metasequoia, Glyptostroboides, the dawn redwood, trees just making the right decision because you're making a time investment as far as trees are concerned. And as the leaves start to fall off the trees in fall, we think a lot about the trees. I was thinking this past week, Stacy, about the Katsura tree. I don't know if you like that tree. Some people call it the cake tree.
I love it.
Yeah, they smell like caramel candy in fall. They're not technically supposed to be aromatic, but the fall and autumn leaves have been varyingly described as smelling of cinnamon, burnt sugar, or ripe apples. But isn't fall just a great time of the year?
Yes, and the Katsura, or Cercidophyllum japonicum, is not the only tree that does have that kind of sweetness, which makes sense because what's happening in fall is they're storing sugars, so those leaves still have, sugars and energy and all of that in them. But it probably does it better than any other tree. To me, it smells like fresh baked cookies. That's like when you just take them out of the oven and then everything's warm. And you mostly only smell it on sunny, dry days. If it's really wet, cold, you don't typically smell it. But once those leaves fall, and they cover the ground, it is, the first time I ever experienced it, it was like you couldn't even believe that it was actually real.
Smells like cotton candy to me.
Yeah, it definitely has a strong kind of burnt sugar smell. Now, I'm glad you were talking about time and mentioned Metasequoia.
Okay.
Because you want to talk about a tree out of time. I mean, I could go on, I won't. But Metasequoia, also known as the dawn redwood, was a tree that was only known from the fossil record. They thought that it was extinct until the 1940s, that recent.
Wow.
And some scientists deep in China found some and were like, oh my gosh, it's not extinct. And the first plants in the U.S. Came to the Arnold Arboretum, and they are still there today. You can actually see the very first one. And that's just a great story. You know, of course, yes, you need time. And it's actually a pretty fast-growing plant.
Sure it is.
My friend has one that he planted. His is the yellow variety called Ogon. And I can't believe how fast it grew. But such a great story, you know, for when people are visiting your garden, when people ask, hey, your pine tree over there is losing leaves. Everything okay? Not a pine tree, but it is a deciduous conifer. Such an amazing plant. Really one of my favorites.
You're right. And last fall when I was at the Arnold Arboretum, they're just majestic, huge, beautiful.
And their foliage is described as salmon colored before it falls. And that is a very good descriptor of it. It's kind of hard to imagine, but when you see it in person with that red bark and that beautiful salmony color, it's like a whole new tree. It's really amazing.
So if you need time for your landscape to develop, I want to remind you using annuals in your landscape is a great way to fill in your landscape as plants that you want to develop are maturing. And of course, here in the north, I love tropical plants, but the bummer is we have to start over every year. I have a monstrous banana tree in my yard. It's just spectacular right now. The neighbors comment on it. It's a northern banana, Musa Bajou, so it'll come back next year, but it's going to die all the way back to the ground. So you have to start all over again, but that's okay because that's what we do with herbaceous perennials also. And we've all heard about slow cooking. Stacy, you know I love 5-gallon pails. I also like crock pots.
Oh, do you?
Yeah.
How many do you have?
One.
Oh, well, that's good. It's not to the level of the 5-gallon.
No, I'm not collecting crock pots.
Okay.
I just like cooking in crock pots.
Well, you know, there is talk about an investment in time. There is nothing quite like putting the time into making a meal and then putting it in the slow cooker and coming home to that.
Yeah.
You know, and it's perfect for fall. That is like a great thing for fall. I'm glad you mentioned about annuals. I often recommend that people use annual vines on trellises and pergolas and so forth while they're waiting for their other plants to get established. Because something like a morning glory, I mean, there's so many interesting vines. Your hyacinth beans, of course, are a great choice. That's a nice way to fill something up while you're waiting for your clematis or, you know, climbing hydrangea or whatever to actually start doing its thing. I think it's something that people don't really consider very much, is just taking up space while you wait for things to fill in. And it's a very handy way to get more plants in. And who doesn't want that?
Yeah, it's a great way to fill in. So what about slow plants? I like to think about low grow or slow grow plants. I would market them as plants that pump the brakes. You know, one that comes to mind is Japanese maple. Japanese maple has this inappropriate reputation of being difficult to grow. And it's not, but it does need to be placed in the right place. And yes, it isn't going to grow like a weed. So plants that tap the brakes, and we'll talk about those in segment 4. I'm sure you've got something to say about that also in Plants on Trial.
Plants on Trial is dedicated to growth rates today. So
there we go.
Hang on to your hat.
Fantastic.
You know, in Japanese maples, I think one of the reasons you know, you've got me thinking it's a little bit like bigleaf hydrangeas in that everybody loves them. So they're getting these plants because they're beautiful and they want one, and then they're sticking at any old place, and they're plants that aren't necessarily difficult to grow, but they have their specific needs. And if those needs aren't met, the plant is not doing what you bought it for. And so, yeah, a lot of times people feel really discouraged with it, and especially if they buy a really expensive Japanese maple, because some Japanese maples out there are pretty darn pricey.
Boy, pricey. And of course, there's many different types of Japanese maples too. You have upright, you have mounded, you have weeping or pendulating Japanese maples. So all of that comes into play also. So as we talk about timing, Stacy, I do have to admit that when it comes to anticipation in the gardening season, I tend to overdo it a little bit. I do it on the back end in fall. I'm out there in the snow, as well as on the front end, getting out there too soon in spring. I can't help it. So this week's limerick is devoted to that. Planting too early in spring, I'd chosen. Who knows what kind of weather blows in Too much of a rush turned the plants into mush because now all my begonias are frozen. They tell me timing is everything. It keeps things naturally from spiraling. The calendar says freeze, but I'm anxious. Out I squeeze all the growing season I can wring. I'm out there before winter's loosed its grip, and after fall's chill, the leaves strip. If it's muddy or cruddy, take your chances, good buddy. Get out there and let it rip. That's me in a nutshell, Stacy.
Well, hey, as long as you're willing to accept those mistakes that are made from your enthusiasm and not beat yourself up over them, I say go for it. I totally get it.
Thank you very much. Let's talk more plant timing coming up. Plants on Trial next here on the Gardening Simplified Show.
Greetings, gardening friends, and welcome back to the Gardening Simplified Show, where today we are talking about time. And there's a lot of ways to think about time in the garden. In fact, a garden is a physical manifestation of time and space, which is a really interesting way to think about it. But as I've said before on the show, we get a lot of questions from home gardeners around the U.S. and Canada here at Proven Winners, and we're always happy to help and to answer those questions. And I cannot even tell you how many times I have gotten questions about growth rates, which is a totally normal thing to wonder. People will say, you would think people would ask, hey, is this a fast-growing plant or a slow-growing plant? Mm-hmm. But no. The common question that I have gotten goes like this. Tell me in number of inches how many, or tell me exactly how many inches of growth this plant is going to put on every year.
Oh my, yes.
And I have to think that this is most likely one type of person. I'm guessing probably an engineer who is used to working in very predictable kind of scenarios where you don't have all...
Or an accountant.
Or possibly an accountant. It's someone who is very, used to working again in these detailed scenarios where there's no unpredictability. Mm-hmm. And the simple fact is plants are unpredictable. Now, I don't want people to think that there is not an inherent genetic component to plant growth. There is. A plant, any specific variety, a species of plant, does have an element of genetic contribution to its growth rate. It is naturally slow, it's naturally fast, it's naturally medium-ish growth rate. But really, the reason that we cannot answer those questions, and I'm sure it drives those innocent, people crazy when we can't give them that answer, but there's just so many factors that influence growth rate. I mean, all of that information that's there on your plant tag when you buy a new shrub or any kind of plant, all of that information is directly impacting the growth rate. The light, the soil, the water, the fertilizing, the hardiness zones that are also on that tag. All of those factors are going to influence how fast a plant grows, irrespective of that inherent growth rate that it just has.
Boy, I agree. That's really well said. And it's contingent also on where the plant is native to.
Yeah.
You look at saguaro cactus in the desert, succulents in the desert, or alpine plants up in mountainous ranges. They naturally are shorter or slower growing.
Right. They conserve their resources.
Right.
It takes a lot of resources to grow rapidly. So when you have plants typically from areas where maybe the growth is not so favorable, they do tend to be smaller, slower growing because it is a better use of their resources rather than putting tons of resources into growing, leaps and bounds every single year. And you can use this to your advantage. And I think that's something that, I certainly do in my garden. It's very dry. And I actually appreciate how, in many cases, that dry soil can help to manage things. I think a great example is a plant that I talk about often on the show, El Nino Catalpa. So I have this plant in my garden. I love it. It stays quite manageable despite the fact that it's now in its third or fourth year in my garden. If you were to come here just outside of Studio A, there are a number of El Nino Catalpas planted in front of the building, and they are on drip irrigation. And boy, are they taking full advantage of that extra
huge
water. They're enormous. And I think they're even younger than the plant that I have in my yard. I think they were planted a year after maybe. And over here, they're skyrocketing to 10 to 15 feet tall, very wide, where, mine is probably around 8 feet. And it's not an issue of pruning. It's an issue of the resources that it gets. So we're unable to give like hard and fast answers to these questions. But as much as I know that is frustrating for some people, what we can do is kind of help you understand which plants are going to be slower growing, even under ideal conditions, and which plants are going to be faster growing. And I think, a lot of times people would automatically assume that faster growing is better. And that's not the case. Of course, if you want privacy, yes, faster growing is going to be better. But a lot of times, slower growing plants, like you said, Rick, are going to be easier to care for. You're not going to have to worry about pruning them. Mm-hmm. You're not going to have to worry about them overgrowing the space. Dwarf conifers, great example. Dwarf conifers can actually get quite large. It's just that they are so slow growing that it takes decades, if not centuries, for them to actually turn into anything that is not considered dwarf.
It's that way with a number of evergreens, right? I mean, if you think about bristlecone pine.
Yeah.
Right.
Overall, I would say evergreens in general, there are some exceptions we're going to go over, tend to be on the slower side, even under ideal growing conditions. Of course, there are definitely exceptions, like I said, but overall, if someone says to you like, hey, what is a slow growing plant? You can say most evergreens, pretty on the whole, pretty slow growing. And I would consider personally, I don't know how you feel about this, but I would consider a slow growing plant one that is putting on 4 inches of growth or less each year.
Yeah.
Does that seem like a reasonable amount? And this is after they're established. This is another really important factor is, those first 2 to 3 seasons, you're not necessarily going to see a lot of growth on top, whether the plant is considered a slow growing plant or a fast growing plant, because all of those resources are going into the roots. Like you said at the beginning of the show, Rick, you have to look down. I mean, you can't really see the roots, but they're down there. And until that root system is developed, the plant is not going to be able to grow very much because the root and the top grow in proportion to one another. So if it's slow growing on top, chances are the roots are also going to be on the slower side, and it's going to need a little bit more time. So slow growing, we're going to count under 4 inches of growth per year. For fast growing, we're going to take that up to 8+ inches. What do you think? Does that seem reasonable? Like a good guide? Because of course, this is all very relative. So slow growing, number one, this is, so for plants on trial, we're just going to give you 5 slow growers and 5 fast growers from the Proven Winners Color Choice line. Number 1, Boxwood. It is honestly surprising to me that Boxwood is as popular as it is, given how slow it is to grow.
It's on my list.
And it's such a great plant. I mean, we're really lucky to have it. It's beautiful. It's durable. But it is slow, and it's especially slow for growers. So you have to understand that if you are bringing boxwood into your garden, you're going to be paying a little bit more for it because you are buying time. That is, it takes longer to actually produce. Now, there are some faster growing boxwood like our Sprinter and New Gen Freedom, which will be new to the Proven Winners Color Choice line in 2026. These are fast growing for boxwood. So there's also this element of relativity, within there. And the flip side of those being fast growing boxwood is that you actually have to prune them, because if you don't prune them, they will get kind of open and floppy without being pruned. So you trade off that lower maintenance where you might never have to prune a slow growing boxwood if you don't want to. You will absolutely have to trim these faster growing varieties. Number 2, Barberry. And this is a plant, I'm so surprised that it is as popular as it is when it is an absolute bear for growers to produce. It's so slow, but on the other hand, that is one of the reasons why it's considered so low maintenance, because you don't really need to prune it because it grows so slowly, and so much the better since its stems are covered in thorns. Then you don't have to go fussing around with pruning something and getting prickled the whole time. Winterberry Holly. A pretty slow plant, especially in less than ideal conditions, but overall it is slow. If you want to grow Winterberry Holly, I would encourage you to seek out the biggest plants that you can. Don't start with those tiny mail order plants unless you want to do a lot of TLC and a lot of waiting until you get that fabulous berry display in winter. Taxus. Another plant. How is this plant so popular when it is so slow to grow?
We're not talking about the state of Taxus.
Yes, we are talking about you. And interestingly, the smaller varieties, or the more upright varieties, are the ones that grow more slowly. So we have Stonehenge Skinny. That is a very slow growing plant that's going to be much slower growing because it's tall and narrow. Compared to Stonehenge Dark Druid, which is more of that classic kind of rounded shape. So the best thing you can do if you're growing these, start with larger plants so you're not waiting around forever for them to do anything. Number 5, upright junipers. Spreading junipers can actually be fairly reasonably medium growth rate, I would say, but upright junipers tend to be very slow, again, in production as well as in the landscape. And this is very frustrating for gardeners like me who can't grow Arborvitae, which is the ultimate fast-growing shrub, because I have deer. And of course, they love Arborvitae. And so you're waiting forever for those upright junipers to turn into anything. So quickly, our fast-growing plants, roses, number 1. So easy to grow. Easily putting on 8+ inches of growth every year. Even smaller varieties like our Oh So Easy series are still very vigorous once they're established. So that's why you can prune roses. That's why it's good to prune roses, because it helps to concentrate that energy into less of the plant so they don't grow, multiple inches on top of what's already very tall. Bigleaf hydrangeas. It's a plant that frustrates people, but they have an extremely fast growth rate, which I think also plays into that frustration because people are expecting them, thinking they can prune them, and then they're taking off the flower buds. Mm-hmm. Butterfly bush, another extremely fast growing plant. Even if it dies back to the ground, you've got stems growing great within a matter of weeks in the spring. Diervilla. Our Kodiak Diervilla are a very fast, easy-growing kind of plant.
Established quickly in my landscape.
Yeah, established quickly, easy to grow. Yep. And then finally, Arborvitaes that are sold for hedging, like Spring Grove, North Pole, and a variety called Full Speed Ahead American Pillar. Fastest growing one out there, can grow up to 2 feet a year with proper care. So make sure you check us out on YouTube to get that whole list so you can check it twice and decide if you want a fast or slow growing plant. We have to take a little break, and when we come back, we're opening up the mailbag, so stay tuned. Greetings, gardening friends, and welcome back to the Gardening Simplified Show, where it's our time to answer your gardening questions. And I think we have a show first today. We have a question from right here inside the studio that came up while we were on break. Adriana was asking, as I was finishing up about those slow and fast-growing plants, she was asking if a plant is slow growing, is it easier to transplant?
That's a great question.
Because, of course, the roots and the top are growing in conjunction with each other. So naturally, the roots are likely to spread a lot less far on a plant that is slower growing and is not going to have as big of a root system. It's a really good, interesting, idea. And I would say overall, of course, there's always exceptions, that yes, they are going to have a less extensive root system, which may make them easier to transplant. However, I would say that they're going to generally be more likely to be set back from having been transplanted. Although, that said, and now that I'm thinking about it, I transplanted a ton of boxwood last spring, and they went off without a hitch.
But I think there's a lot of validity to that, because the plant that came to mind with Adriana's question for me was rhododendron. And I put rhododendron in the slow-growing category. Yeah. And a rhododendron's root system is small proportionately to the top. So if I do have to move a rhododendron, I cut it back pretty hard. And it takes time for the rhododendron to recover from that. But it's relatively easy to move because the root system's small.
Yeah, and shallow rooted. And that's another interesting thing too, is most of the slow growing plants that are on that list do tend to be shallow rooted, which you would think they'd be deeper rooted, because but anyway, plants are fascinating, an endless mystery. So hard to generalize, but something worth considering that yes, typically if something is slow growing, it is going to need a lot more TLC and time, the theme of the day, to recover from that transplanting.
For the mailbag, speaking of Adriana, she gave me a butternut squash from her garden. I can't wait to make some butternut squash soup in my crock pot this week.
It's a nice
Thank
one.
you,
Yeah,
Adriana.
she's a real champ.
Yeah.
She knows her stuff. All right. What's our first question for the mailbag today?
Choi writes to us, "Hello, Stacy and Rick. Love your show. Thank you. Early this summer, I encountered bagworms on my evergreen arborvitae. Thank goodness I caught it early, but they did some damage on the trees. I researched and found that BT works if the worms are still in the early stages. I used Captain Jack's BT. From the pictures, the first 2 arborvitae, you can still see the bagworms. All the worms are dead now, I hope. My question to you is, when should I start looking for the bagworms and start spraying?
Right. Bagworms are, something that no one heard of hardly at all, 15 years ago. And now, if you were growing arborvitae, and especially if you're growing a lot of arborvitae, chances are you have at least some bagworms. And bagworms are a bit like what their name says. They're a little kind of caterpillar that as they feed, they make this shell kind of for themselves. Real architects out of little bits of twigs and leaves. Pretty fascinating. And then that protects them, and they become basically invincible on the tree because they have this tree-made shell on them. They're a pretty interesting pest, but yeah, they can cause major damage on arborvitae. So BT, Bacillus thuringiensis, is a non-toxic except to caterpillars and grubs and other larvae. Spray that will actually prevent their development. And so usually if you're trying to control grubs, you have to inoculate it into your lawn. If you are controlling something like a bagworm, you can actually spray the BT onto the affected plant. You don't want to hit anything that is not a target pest. And that will actually prevent them from continuing to develop. So it is effective. You need to be treating from about, and this is assuming the Midwest, mid-May to mid-July. Once they get to about early to mid-July, that shell that they make for themselves is so developed that your BT spray will not be able to actually contact the pest, and it will be ineffective. So you really need to concentrate it in that time period, that 2-month time period. But the thing about bagworms is right now they are about ready to settle down, if they haven't already, and just wait out winter. So you can also go out and pick them all off of your plants. Of course, for some people who have a really bad infestation, this may be mission impossible. But for a lot of us, just going out and picking a few every day, just put them in the garbage. Don't compost them. Just you can step on them or just throw them out in your trash. Hand picking them, as long as you do so before early June next year, you will do substantial help towards eradicating your bagworms.
Yeah, and thank you for the question. What a great question for a timing show.
Yes,
using
exactly.
BT. And of course, one of the things that makes BT great is has a very short residual when you use it. So timing is everything.
It is, yeah. So make sure your particular BT product that you buy should have instructions on it. You can also reach out to your state's cooperative extension to find out what their exact timing is, because it will vary based on your temperature. The information I just shared was from a great page on the Purdue University website. Your mileage may vary depending on where you are located.
Stacy Jackie has a great question for you. I have a little quick-fire hydrangea planted in a container. Is it best to overwinter it outside with protection next to my home or in my unheated garage? I live in Western Pennsylvania, Zone 6A. I enjoy watching your show every week. I've learned so much.
Oh, so nice. Thanks, Jackie. There's so many people who write to us and think that they should bring their hardy plants indoors if they are in a container. And the answer to that is generally no, you should not. The plant will be stressed, and so will you, because you'll be looking at such a stressed out plant that you won't know what to do with yourself. So if a plant is hardy and could normally spend winter outdoors in your garden, if it weren't in a container, then the answer is that it needs to spend winter getting fresh air, exposure to the changing light levels. And if you try to bring it in, even in an unheated garage, it's probably going to get fairly stressed out. Then you would also need to worry about watering it. Now, you're never going to have to water it like you would in the middle of the summer, but you will need to check on its water. And I just find that generally speaking, the plants don't overwinter as well than if they're outside just getting exposed to fresh air. Now, a couple of things about this situation. You will need a container that can stay outside all winter long. So if you live in a cold climate, you can't really use terracotta containers or most ceramic containers. even if they say they're weatherproof, I don't know. I just don't feel good about it. I'm not going to risk my investment.
I agree. They're expensive.
You know, they're expensive, yeah. And the more expensive ones are the ones that claim they're frostproof because they're generally fired at higher temperatures. So there's less moisture in them to freeze and thaw and cause the cracking. But overall, you're going to want to have anything that you're overwintering outdoors in a metal, plastic, fiberglass, wood type of container. And you also want to, I always tell people, position it so it's not within the drip line of a roof or anything like that. And very often people will want to, you know, put it up near a structure or something to try to protect it. But very often what happens is that then the plant will be getting pelted with snow coming off a roof. It will get dripping water. You know, when we get those thaws out in late winter, early spring. And then, of course, everything freezes and then your plant's all encased in ice. So you want to avoid keeping it in those kind of conditions if you can help it. Overall, you know, I think I was a rooftop gardener in New York City. I, you know, overwintered plants in big metal containers on, you know, floors as high as like the 27th floor. And that's some pretty serious, you know, wind and cold conditions. And that includes, you know, evergreens like Arborvitae, junipers. We lost very, very little over winter.
And I think the key element here, Stacy, is that I believe you got to allow plants to shut down naturally and give them the time to do that. For us as human beings, we know winter is coming. You walk into a retail store and there's Halloween stuff mixed in with all the Christmas stuff. And you're like, I'm not ready for this. And of course, it starts to get cold and it gets dark early and we all have to acclimate. Well, it takes a plant a while to acclimate. You got to give those plants a chance to acclimate.
Yeah, definitely. And, you know, you can... there are some plants that will do okay if overwintered in a cool, dry place, as long as you're checking on water. I've heard from countless home gardeners who have overwintered bigleaf hydrangeas. You know, because those are plants that can get winter damage. And those are a plant that generally can handle that kind of condition, but you ideally want it to be light. So you don't want a windowless garage if you can help it. And you want some protection from the worst of the weather, but you also don't want it to be heated because then the plant won't go dormant.
Agreed.
So really, I think when I give the advice to try to keep something outdoors, if at all possible, it's because relatively few of us have the correct indoor conditions for trying to overwinter shrubs in containers. We have great information on growing shrubs in containers on provenwinnerscolorchoice.com, and we'll add that to the YouTube description. Right now, we got to take a little break, and when we come back, we're going to be finishing up our conversation on timing, so please stay tuned.
Welcome back to the Gardening Simplified show, where this week we're talking about timing. Stacy, I was doing some reading from a university in Australia that was studying a gene response in plants where they feel if you touch a plant, it slows its growth. Kind of interesting.
Huh. Really?
Yeah. So we'll share that on the website. And then, of course, as we talk about timing, also you got to talk about the difference between hot composting and cold composting or passive composting, which can take quite some time to create a workable mulch or soil that you can use in your landscape, whereas hot composting maybe takes a little more work, but you can pretty rapidly produce compost for your garden.
Yeah, I was really surprised the first time that I got hot composting right, how quickly it developed. Yeah. You know, and the reason that I hadn't gotten it right previously was I was just not keeping it wet enough. I was just kind of letting nature take its course, and it was not enough moisture. But then once I started watering it, I was like, wow, I got compost already. This is great.
Exactly. So, Stacy, as far as timing is concerned, slow grow plants, or as I call them, plants that tap the brakes, in many cases come from environments or regions where it can be pretty harsh. Again, you think about the desert and cactus, succulents. You think about alpine plants. One plant that's a favorite of mine, and I almost consider it kind of like an alpine plant, would be creeping thyme. And thyme would be a great plant to talk about during the show anyhow. I love creeping thyme. It's hardy and drought tolerant. Love it in my landscape. And it's one of those plants that grows slowly. You can put it in cracks. You can put it in pathways. And so creeping thyme is certainly one of the plants on the list. Another plant I'd put on the list, and you can argue it with me, but it would be peonies. Peonies are long-lived. They can handle harsh conditions. They like to stay put. Yes, in spring when they grow, they can grow rather rapidly, and then they bloom beautifully. But it's one of those long-term plants in the landscape. And
yeah, I would agree. It's, I think when a lot of people think about the concept of growth rate, they're thinking, how fast does it elongate? But it's also kind of how fast does it form an appreciable plant or an appreciable clump in the case of peonies. And well, yes, the physical plant of the peony grows relatively quickly. If you start with a very small peony, you will be waiting for several years until you have that kind of nice big clump. And that's why, when you see those big, well-established clumps at old gardens or old homesteads and that kind of thing, they've probably been there undisturbed for, 30, 50 years. And by that time, they'll form a really large clump.
Another plant for the list I have on my list is rhododendron. We mentioned that earlier. But again, what's been real telling to me, Stacy, is with rhododendron, again, this factor of slow grow or fast grow to a large extent is contingent on its environment. Because, again, we live here along the lakeshore of Lake Michigan in West Michigan, and the rhododendrons grow beautifully. Further inland, where the winters can have less snow but be very cold, the rhododendrons don't grow as quickly. A small root system proportionately to the top of the plant. So again, Stacy, that slow grow or fast grow thing sometimes is contingent on the environment a plant grows.
Yeah, that's such a good point. And I did want to mention that too when I was talking in Plants on Trial. The temperature that a plant experiences throughout the year can make a huge difference. And that's one of the reasons why when you buy a Proven Winners Color Choice Shrubs, there is very often a wide range of height and width on our plant tags. And we're not saying that so that we're non-committal. We're not saying that to confuse you, but it's because in colder climates where you're going to have a shorter growing season, that plant is going to end up on the smaller side. Whereas if you go into warmer climates where the growing season can be months longer than it is here, then it's obviously going to get bigger because it has a lot more time to grow every single year. So there's so many so many factors like that influence a plant's growth rate that, again, we're not trying to be cagey and not tell you, but really I think it goes to show you that there is an element of nature, but overall, the gardener determines how fast a plant is going to grow with their care and siting.
I agree. And from my perspective, it's a combination of plant genetics as well as environment. And let's use an example here. Delosperma, native to eastern and southern Africa. It thrives in heat, is drought tolerant, virtually maintenance free when given the right growing conditions.
Yeah, I have had a very eye-opening experience with Delosperma this year. It's been really, really interesting. I've tried to get Delosperma established for years, and I was always starting with really tiny plants. They would live, but they just wouldn't spread very well. And then I was pretty rough with them through the season, not giving them supplemental water, and all of that kind of stuff. But last year I planted the kaleidoscope Delospermas from Proven Winners Perennials, and I had 1 gallon plant, so I never planted a 1 gallon Delosperma before. And I have been amazed at how fast they have grown, how beautifully they have filled in. And I was also watering them through last fall and this spring because I had a lot of other stuff in there that was new as well. And it has made a huge difference. And I've found so often that, I look for a situation where I don't have to provide supplemental water. But if you do not provide that TLC in those first couple of years to get the plant established, to get that root growth going, that will make all the difference in the plant's long-term health. And now, I can cut all of that back and help the Delosperma to curtail that growth, so it's not overtaking my paving stones, which it's so happy and vigorous now that it actually is. that by keeping it drier, that helps to keep it in check.
That's a perfect example for today's show. And for folks keeping score at home, if you're listening to the podcast or radio, and I said podcast, not what came out of my mouth. When we talk about Delosperma, for people who are unfamiliar with the plant, the common name, many people would refer to it as ice plant.
Yep, yeah.
Is that correct?
That's right, yeah.
All right. Saxifrage or rock foil, that's another really cool plant. And so, and it's one of those plants that people like to touch too. And of course, people love touching plants. But saxifrage is another. I don't know if you have any rock foil in your landscape.
I do not have any in my garden, but I was fortunate enough when I was at the New York Botanical Garden School of Professional Horticulture in the New York Botanical Garden, working in a world-class rock garden, and have a lot of experience growing those plants both in the former rock garden, I don't think it's still there, as well as in the propagation house. And yeah, those are some plants for patient people. Yes. That is for sure. You've got to be patient and well organized to be a rock garden, a true alpine rock gardener. But man, those are some cool plants.
But these people, and to their credit, they are very passionate.
Oh gosh, yeah. Yeah, and they trade plants. They have amazing networks of, helping people to get their plants, and just really a fascinating thing. I might join the Rock Garden Society.
There you go. Another plant, and I think this is a favorite of yours, Stacy, and I'm going to put it in the timing list because it just appears for a short time but is long-lived, and that is Iris reticulata.
Oh, yeah.
Native to Turkey, northern Iraq, and Iran. That's one of those plants, too, that once you have it in your landscape, you fall in love with it.
It's so cute. And, I love that it brings that blue and purple color at a time when everything else in your lawn seems to be yellow, daffodils and everything else. And yeah, it's so happy for me here in West Michigan that, I get a little bag of it at this time of year once the bulbs start coming on sale. That was how it started, a single bag that I found on sale at Meijer. And now I have multiple clumps because it spread so well. It's so happy here in our sandy soil, and with that lower moisture in the summer to prevent the bulbs from rotting. The time has given me a very nice population of Iris reticulata.
That's fantastic. Some people would put sedums on the list, and I'm not talking about the upright sedums, but lower growing, creeping sedums. Some can be relatively small, at least when put into a rock garden setting. You had mentioned boxwood. I agree with that. I want to run one by you here a minute. Tater tot arborvitae. Because, again, working in the garden center, people love this plant. And unlike the old globe arborvitaes, it tends to stay in check and be relatively slow grow. You agree?
Yeah, I would say that it is slow growing. It's kind of hard to talk about arborvitae as a monolith because, again, there are those very fast growing varieties that have been developed for rapid hedging. And then there are these very dwarf ones. And I would say that tater tot is small and that is a good thing. It's small and it's slow growing. Anna's Magic Ball, which is round but golden and a little bit larger, I would say is heading more towards a medium growth rate. Okay. And I would say overall globe arborvitaes tend to be on the slow to medium side. But again, as I was saying earlier about dwarf conifers, just because it starts out slow growing doesn't mean it won't eventually not be so dwarf. Woodward Globe is a great example. A lot of people buy Woodward Globe arborvitae. There are some in my neighborhood that must have been there for 30 plus years. Exactly. And those things are 5 feet by 5 feet and not so dwarf anymore. But it took them 30 plus years to get there.
Sure. Here's an interesting statistic for you. Americans consume approximately 70 million pounds of tater tots a year.
Oh, wow. That's a side of tater tots.
Yeah. 70 million pounds.
And we're actually talking about the food here, not the number of tater tot arborvitaes that have been sold, although that would be amazing if that were true.
3,710,000,000 individual tots per year.
Wow.
Amazing.
That'd be a lot of tater tots.
So a few other slow plants, snake plant inside the house or sansevieria, agaves, cactus. Of course, bonsai. We'd have to mention bonsai lithops, which are living stones. Always a fun plant to have indoors. Also, Clivia, flowering plant that can take a number of years to bloom, slow growing, but once it blooms, it's like, wow, it was worth the wait.
Oh, yeah, for sure.
So, Stacy, timing is everything. Thanks so much. This was fun.
Thank you.
Thank you, Adriana, and thanks most of all to you. Make sure to tune us in on YouTube or radio or podcast, however you want to get your version of the Gardening Simplified show. Have a great week.